Okay, I hope I'm live. I'm trying to do 8 things at once now. So I'm going to go to our YouTube channel and see if it is coming through here. Sorry about this. And I'm not seeing it. Okay. If someone would indicate if you can see this, just say, hey, I can see you, and you can hear and see me. Okay, did that work, folks? Can you hear me now? The funny thing is that there's okay, Linda, can you confirm that you can hear me? Just say yes. Um, I see somebody. Okay, I'm going to act like everybody can hear me and see me, and I'm going to go over to my share screen here. Share screen. Okay. Okay. For an old guy, this is difficult. So for some reason, I'm not getting the video feed on the device where I want to get the video feed. So just let me make one check here. Gotta go to messages. Hang on, now it's making me. I swear this thing is just. Hi, folks. Entertain yourselves here for just a moment while I try to get this thing going. Okay, now I'm going to, and of course we're starting right on time, just like I wanted to do. Well, this could go for a while. It is a very interesting time, and now hang on a second here. Excuse me 1 second. It's hard to do this. I've got about 4 screens, 2 computers, an iPhone, an iPad, and all of this stuff, and I'm trying to do this while still talking and making sense. So it's not like chewing gum and walking at the same time. So let me just see this. I want to see if I can get a browser window. Okay, it does look like everything is going. So now I just got to mute my YouTube thing. Okay, sorry, folks. So we're going to call this polarizing. So obviously the big news that's just coming out, this is in the U.S., and it is a very troubling time for someone who actually likes the United States of America and thinks that this country has been a pretty good country. Hang on. So I'm going to get to that. Just let me do a couple preliminary things. So this is something from the UK. This shows that the UK is actually doing some things more or better than the United States is. And that would be specifically the I'll tell you, nothing's working right on my end. So I'm trying to find the chat so I can actually try to follow along in the chat. Somebody says I have the rest of my day open. Yeah, well, I'm trying to get this done. So here's one of the deals that we've got this transgender thing, and in the UK they recently came out. They closed down the Tavistock Clinic, which was promoting this transgenderism ideology. And what they had seen was just this incredibly large number, mainly among teenage girls, of wanting to change sex because they're going through puberty and there's a lot of things. There's a lot of psychological issues, but they were also in clusters. So they shut down the Tavistock Clinic. And now everybody's going, oh, what are we going to do? Even our FDA has come out and said, we're not going to let you use this puberty blocker thing that you do. This is a drug not really been tested for use for this particular thing. We don't know the long-term effects. It's used to castrate men who commit sex crimes. So now that they are, they shut down this Tavistock Clinic. And what they were doing was they're putting men, for example, the picture that you see on the screen right there on the left-hand side, this is from the Daily Mail on Sunday in the UK. And this guy was put in a women's prison. And what they found, actually, there was a study that was published in the Times, the UK Times of London, back in January. And that study said that the men who had been put in women's prison because they identified as women, and there was an increase in rapes, all the stuff that you can imagine. When those men were sent back home to where they came from, they started identifying as male again. So it seems like it's sort of a convenient trans thing that's happening. So they came out and they've announced now that trans prisoners will not be housed with other women. In other words, if you're a man and you have man parts, you're not going to be put in a women's prison. And that seems like common sense, but it's amazing that it's taken this long for the governments to get together on this. Let's see. there was a policy report that came out, why criminal justice policy needs to prioritize sex over gender identity, and that was just published recently. Also need to keep track of this thing that's going on with the war in Ukraine and the collapse in energy markets. Remember, Biden went to Saudi Arabia recently and he said, hey, we need more oil. So Saudi Arabia came out after that and said, hey, we're not going to produce more oil. We're going to up it to 13 million barrels a day, and that's all that we can do. And now I need to get to the slide. So here's somebody said that this is a supply chain thing, fuel for Teslas. Why am I not? Excuse me. I'm having a terrible time here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry for me to tell where I'm at. The other thing that's happening too in the United States is we just enacted this Inflation Reduction Act. This is going to play into the Trump story that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. They are hiring 87,000 IRS agents, additional IRS agents. Now, then they're not going to come on board right away unless they just have a certain task that they're going to need to happen. So they're going to come after us. I looked it up, there are 614 billionaires in the United States. There are about 5.6 million millionaires. They're not going after the billionaires, not even going after a lot of the millionaires. They're coming after normal, everyday people. And they're weaponizing the Internal Revenue Service, just like they've weaponized everything else. They've weaponized the Department of Education. They've weaponized the Environmental Protection Agency against businesses. They've weaponized the Food and Drug Administration. They've weaponized health agencies. And now they've weaponized, as we'll talk about in just a minute, the Department of Justice. So this Inflation Reduction Act, though, is going to put, they're making a big bet that they're going to be able to have the minerals that are needed to supply the lithium and other rare earth minerals that are needed to make batteries. This is fantasy land. You need to know right now on the planet, the top rare earth mineral producer and miner is China. And we don't have a good relationship with China right now. We may be on the verge of a big war with China. And I might talk about that today. I may talk more about it Sunday. The number two producer, and I think this plays into Bible prophecy, the number two country in the world now with the reserves to make rare earth minerals is Russia. That's kind of an interesting, Turkey. Turkey is the number two reserves. They're at about 85% of what China has. So the okay, now I'm trying to get to my browser so I can actually see the I have a YouTube app, and for some reason my live is not showing up. I'm not signed in on my. I'll try to do chat at the end. If you have a question, and Linda, if you could try to collect the questions and maybe feed them to me through Messenger, I can read them there. So here's this is just sort of to indicate the probable extent of the food problem that we're facing. This is the United States. Over 50% of the United States is in drought right now. Mexico, it's 70%. There's large portions of Canada that are in drought. This affects food production amounts. So when you have a food crisis, it's going to be exacerbated by this. The other thing that we keep seeing are these wars and rumors of wars. This is Baby Kim in North Korea, was saying that the Korean peninsula is on the brink of war. Also, you should understand too, when I talk about demographic collapse, I talk about demographic collapse in, there's really 5 major places. Well, there's actually 6 major places that it's happening. One would be Europe. People just stopped having kids. And this has been going on for 30 years. And it's not going to turn around. There are no business or economic models that say once a country gets this far into a demographic collapse that it can be turned around. It's really never been seen in human history. So Europe is in decline. Japan has been in decline. They're actually losing population every year now. It just can't be changed. Another country that's in demographic collapse is South Korea. Another one is Russia. Another one is Iran. There was published in the Tehran Times, which is a government-run newspaper in Iran, and they're bringing it up because they're trying to get people to have more children, because you need to have, if you're going to have war and production and take care of old people and that type of thing, you need children. And they reported in Tehran Times a couple of months ago that the nation of Iran was in the steepest decline in fertility rate of any country in human history. This was their own words, their own description. Now, does that mean I think China's not to be worried about, or Russia, or Iran? No, I mean, certainly they're mentioned in Bible prophecy, but, well, we can argue about Russia and we can argue about China. We know Iran is there, but assuming all these countries are involved in Bible prophecy in the end times, the fact that they're going into demographic collapse, they know this. Xi has built in China has built the biggest personality cult around him of maybe any leader in history. And people just don't tell him the bad news, but he knows what's going on. They've come out with their 10-year census, and they're now starting to leak out little bits and pieces of it. And one of the things that they're leaking out is that they overcounted the number of people in China by 100 million. That's like almost 1/3 the population of the United States. Oops, small rounding error that we made. And they're almost all female. And so when we talk about the trumpets and in Revelation, we talk about this 200 million man army. And then there's a big argument about that. Is it people? Is it demonic? But let's just assume that it's people. It says they're going to come from the east. And we know that now China and India are on the verge of having 200 million men in their countries, just those 2 countries, without the prospect of a female wife. So it talks about a 200 million entity army. If it's men, then everything is set up for that to happen. Now, we can argue about whether we're interpreting that correctly. I get that. But China is also in major economic collapse. That's what's probably leading to this distraction of this operation. It's really sort of a preview of how they would take down Taiwan. They're shooting missiles. It's effectively a blockade. I personally do not think that China is in the logistical place where they could invade with amphibious craft and that type of thing, that they could invade Taiwan. It doesn't mean that they can't make it very difficult for Taiwan. But China's very vulnerable. China's a very vulnerable economy. They need outside oil. They need outside supplies. They need food. I mean, remember, they culled a huge amount of their pork livestock a couple of years ago. Now they don't have enough to feed them, and they're importing stuff like high quality wheat from France and that sort of thing. So these things, they just don't make any sense. And they are trying to they love pork and they want to build that. They have to build that back up. But what if they have another flu thing go through, a virus go through the hogs again? They're in big trouble, and they're very vulnerable. It would be pretty easy for a navy the size of the United States, even in the UK, to shut down the supply chain of oil to China. It has to come from the Persian Gulf. They're getting a lot of it from Iran now. That could be done. So they're setting up these They're doing these drills and that sort of thing. So I got to get my things synced up here. So this is Taiwan, the Straits of Taiwan. It's 80 miles or so off the coast of China. It's one of the major chip manufacturing things in the world. And all the supply chains, you can see this is just tankers and red and container ships in green. And you can see where the shipping lanes are. And so those shipping lanes can be shut down by, it's not a very difficult task. And once that's done, China's in huge trouble. So there's just all of these things. In the war in Ukraine, they're talking about this Ukraine nuclear power plant that they're very concerned about, that it might be attacked, it might leak, they might have another Chernobyl. It's the largest nuclear plant in Europe. That's something to be concerned about. This is a report out of Yale that talks about business retreats and sanctions are crippling the economy. So now I want to go and I want to talk about what's going on with some of the headlines here in the United States over the past 24 hours. Whoops. Here we go. So yesterday morning, in what would be described as a pre-dawn raid, about 30 FBI agents went to Mar-a-Lago, Trump's estate in Palm Beach, Florida. They started carrying away boxes. They were going through his private safe, desk, all of these things. I have to tell you that, well, let me make a comment about something. So it's okay not to like President Trump. There's a lot of people that don't like him. But we have to be honest that Trump did some good things when he was in office. He got a few justices appointed to the Supreme Court, which led to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which we're all very happy about. But I know some people think that Trump's working. This is just WrestleMania, and I think that that's not a really very deep analysis of what's going on. Because if you think somebody doing something good that might even appear righteous is somehow polarizing, causing society to fall apart by that, I just think that that's not a good analysis. But certainly there are characteristics of Trump that we don't like. He can be mean, he can be rude, he can be obnoxious. But what's going on, this is, if this is not rectified quickly, I don't know that there will be a presidential election in 2024. And that may be what one of these sides is going for. Trump has all but indicated that he's going to be running in 2024. And take Trump out of the picture. If it was Ron DeSantis, they'd be doing this to Ron DeSantis. They will do something. They're going to find something like this because they're getting away with it. They have weaponized the FBI and the Department of Justice. And this has been going on with Trump for since whenever he came down the escalator. When was that? 2015? His Russia collusion, tax evasion, obstruction of justice, all of this stuff. And now they're going to say, oh, but this time we got him. You need to trust us. Just take our word for it. We've got him. And you're going to see in the coming weeks and days. Now, the fact that they did this raid, it can mean one of two things. It can mean they don't have anything and they're really stretching and they're really trying to create a distraction. And they're really trying to create a new January 6th that actually where something that they had hoped might have happened at January 6th is actually going to happen. That's a possibility. It is also possible, reading some legal experts, that some of them think that Trump may already be the subject of a sealed indictment. And this is one of the things, this is the QAnon stuff that floated around for years. I've debunked, I don't know how many times, that there were, when it was 8,000 sealed indictments back in 2018, I said that number was just fanciful because there's no way that you can get that many grand juries and complicated cases to issue sealed indictments with multiple defendants. Some of them were saying there's 60 defendants in this indictment. And now that number's risen to like 2 million. It's people are reading the data wrong that they're getting out of the PACER database. And I think it's highly irresponsible. But now in this case, it is possible that there's a sealed indictment out there, or will soon be an indictment out there against Trump. And they're just kind of gathering up the last bit of documents that they haven't been able to get their hands on. That's entirely possible. I'm just telling you that if there's an indictment announced against Trump, my belief is that it will rip the country apart. It will be just a horrible thing. And, it's interesting. This is a tweet from Caroline Glick this morning, where she said, the parallel between the persecution of Trump and the persecution of Netanyahu by the ruling class in Israel and the U.S. is clear. And the meaning is also clear. The elections here and there deal with only one question. Are we objects of freedom and self-determination, or have we been turned to oligarch regimes that despise our people? And I think Caroline this is a perfect analysis of what's going on. The trumped up indictments against Netanyahu in Israel. This is just, there's a very big parallel. They've weaponized the court system and the justice system, the attorney general system in Israel to raise these charges against Netanyahu. And people don't like Netanyahu. I get that. They think he's been around too long and he should just retire and go away and let somebody else run the place. But now we're getting to the place where, what are they running? They're going to run their fifth election, I think, in the last 3 years in Israel. And the governments maybe last a year. They might last 6 months. And then they have a caretaker. And when there's a caretaker government, it seems like there's, rockets coming from Gaza and that sort of thing. So it's just, and I think they're doing the same thing here. So I just see this kind of interesting parallel between Israel and the United States. And I don't see this happening in really any other country. Now they're weaponizing justice systems like in Canada. They went against Art Pulaski, the pastor in, I think it was Edmonton or Calgary. By the way, he was let out recently, and they essentially said everything was done to you was illegal. There was a lady who was put in prison. She made bail, had very strict bail conditions, was claimed to have violated her bail. She was taken back and she was brought to court in shackles, and they let her go. The magistrate said, take those shackles off. She was shackled for protesting. She didn't go out and try to kill anybody. She was just against the regime that they have there. And this is happening in our country. We have people who've been in prison for 18 months regarding what happened in January of 2021. It's absolutely outrageous. So the Trump indictment what was done to Trump, whether you like him or not, this is tearing at the fabric, the social contract that we have in America. And something needs to really be done about it. It's awful what has been done. It's just absolutely, I'm shocked. And this wasn't done to Hillary Clinton. It wasn't done to Sandy Berger, who was, remember, a Hillary Clinton employee at the State Department who went in to review classified documents at the National Archives, which is involved in this. I think it's the National Archives that's driving this, saying, hey, Trump has classified documents. We need to get these documents. Well, when Trump is the president, if he has a classified document, he can do whatever he wants with it. He can leak it to the press because he's the final ultimate authority on what's classified and not classified. By the way, what happened in the Obama administration is that usually that power rests in the president. But in the case of, say, Hillary Clinton, who had been Secretary of State, Obama essentially deputized his cabinet officers to make the decision on classification or declassification, which allowed people to keep documents that they probably shouldn't have kept. So the case against Hillary Clinton, it was pretty clear, but it just wasn't going to happen because we just don't do those things in the United States. And now everything's been weaponized. And I'm just telling you, I've already heard Republicans saying, if we ever get power again, keep your records. We're coming after you. And we're going to do in spades what you've done to us. So you've seen this, and it's all done for show. So they do a pre-dawn raid. They're talking to his lawyers about getting the documents that he took. It was like 15 boxes. And they're negotiating back and forth. I think some had actually even been returned. And so they do a pre-dawn raid with 30 armed agents. Look at these guys standing out there with AK-47s at the gate to Mar-a-Lago. And this is done for show. I've been involved in some white-collar criminal cases, and I can tell you that if I represented someone who's a defendant in a pretty high-profile white-collar case, and they did this. They would, if they had called me up as the lawyer and said, "Hey, could you bring your guy down to be arraigned?" I would have said, "Sure. What time do you want him there? I'll go get him and I'll drive him to the court myself." In fact, in one case that sort of happened, and so he's upstairs in our office, and they came in with guns drawn and all this other stuff, the FBI, because they want to make a point. They want to make it uncomfortable. So when they arrested Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro on these contempt charges, which nobody ever gets charged with contempt of Congress. Eric Holder was in contempt of Congress for 8 years and nothing ever happened to him. But, they want to make a point. They want to make it hard for them. They want them to spend all their money that they've made on lawyers and that type of thing. And it's expensive. I mean, Peter Navarro is going to spend $250,000 on lawyers. Easy on a contempt charge. Same way with Steve Bannon. So they want to make a point. So they do these pre-dawn raids. They did it with Roger Stone also. They come in with these things in the middle of the night or very early in the morning when, you're kind of groggy and just getting up. And bam, the FBI is knocking down your door to arrest you. And they're like, can I put my, you mind if I put my shorts on before I leave? And this has happened. I had it happen to clients of mine. And it's done to make a show. And so this weaponization of the Department of Justice system has been going on. I mean, cases I was involved in are 20 years old now. And they were doing some of this stuff back then. I think it kind of started with Enron, the way they went after Arthur Anderson and some others in that case. And, in the end, Arthur Anderson had to reconstruct itself and go out of business and reconstruct itself. Nobody ever apologized to Arthur Anderson for destroying Arthur Anderson and thousands and thousands and thousands of actual jobs that people had. And so these people in Washington, and this goes for both sides of the aisle, they're all wings of the same bird in many cases. But there are some that are good. There are some people that are good there. There are some good judges and everything. But this thing that's happening right now, this has the potential to completely rip the country apart. And it's not done. This is a banana republic type thing. We don't indict people who are going to be running against somebody in the next election. So if Biden is renominated, he'll run against, it looks like right now he would run against Trump. And now they're trying to throw Trump in jail. This is just not something that we do here in the United States. So I'm going to check the chat real quick and see if there's any questions coming my way. So how do I feel about what happened to President Trump? My personal opinion is it is an outrage. And it's very hard for me to kind of contain myself when I see what's happening. Another question from Tammy. Hi, Tammy. How bad do you think it will get if Trump makes a comeback to the presidency? Well, you mean to run for the president? You're just seeing the tip of the spear here. It's going to get much worse unless something is done to stop this. So right now, what could stop this is the November elections. Now, I'm sort of optimistic that the Republicans will take back the Senate and the House. That will completely change the equation. And I can tell you, If that happens, based on what I'm reading, the tea leaves, so to speak, there will be indictments of a lot of people, not indictments, impeachment of a lot of individuals. Now, you impeach them in the House. It's a simple majority vote. When you get to the Senate, though, you have the trial and you have to have a 2/3 vote. And I don't see that happening unless the Republicans just take back a whole bunch of seats in the Senate. But people need to realize this. They've enacted legislation to bring 87,000 IRS agents into the mix. Remember what happened with Lois Lerner and the way they weaponized the IRS? That's what they're doing now. They're weaponizing it against their political opponents. And yes, you should be concerned if you're a conservative, because they're going to go after conservative not-for-profits. They're already going after the Family Research Council. And we can argue about whether that's a valid thing or not. I think Family Research Council had characterized itself as a church, but they're going to come after conservative churches. You know, they've never really enforced the Johnson Amendment. It's unconstitutional on its face, but you got to get a court to say that. So they're just going to make it difficult and expensive for churches and conservative not-for-profits. I mean, when Lerner was the head of the IRS, and remember, I think I accidentally deleted 10,000 emails. I thought I was hitting save and I hit delete. And this is just absolute nonsense because all those things could be recoverable. I mean, I've done a lot of forensic analysis of hard drives in my days. It's just absolutely outrageous. So I just think it's going to get worse. I mean, maybe right now, the other thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to actually have an armed insurrection that they didn't get in January of 2021. They may be trying to foment that. And it's hard to say that they're not based on what they're doing. If Trump is, so next question from Len, if Trump is found guilty of something, will he be barred from running in 2024? I think that the constitutional provisions, requirements, or qualifications for the office of presidency will control over any statute. So I don't think that even if they get this, I mean, I know that Mark Elias, who's this Democratic stooge lawyer, was saying, oh, you know, this is a Classified Records Act, and if he violates this, he'll be barred from running for office. That's a Democratic stooge lawyer's opinion. I just don't think it'll happen. I mean, I'm even hearing Alan Dershowitz, who's a liberal. He would never vote for Trump. He's saying this whole thing is outrageous. He was on, I think, Glenn Beck this morning. So this whole thing is just absolutely outrageous. So, and they don't like, one thing they don't like about Trump has essentially said, if I get back in power, I'm draining the swamp. I mean, my advice would be, if you can't fire him, put him in a walled off sort of a giant Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is like what Gene Hackman lived in Enemy of the State, the movie with Will Smith, where you couldn't get internet and radio waves or cell phone waves in or out of this Faraday cage. So put them all in giant Faraday cages and let them sit at a desk 8 hours a day and pay them, but get them away from doing stuff to damage people. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, so let's look at some Middle East things. I got maybe 3 things I want to talk about here in the Middle East. Let me get caught up. See slides here I haven't talked about. By the way, China's in major economic meltdown. The real estate sector is collapsing. I've even seen some analysts saying that China their economy will completely, fully, totally collapse in 33 days. And this is interesting because Xi he was going to be appointed president for life in November. He has to run for a fake election. But now it's looking like, I don't even know if he's going to be able to do that, given all the things that are going on. So I think this thing with Taiwan and everything, I think it's serious, but I think it's largely a distraction to keep people in line in China. So I hope I even might retire, by the way. This is See that? There it is. Oh, well, I have a slide here somewhere. The Pope might retire. That would be interesting because that would make two popes retired at the same time. This has never happened I don't think, in history. Usually, back in the Middle Ages, and before that, they would kill off the ones if they had too many sitting around, or the prior one was still alive when the other one took power. But it's possible we might have three popes that are alive at the same time. This is very unusual. So, by the way, I was very tempted today, given the way that I feel about how things are going. I don't know if you can see this. This is somebody gave me this t-shirt a number of years ago, the Apocalypse Now t-shirt. So if you see me actually wearing this some Sunday, you'll know that, you might want to go get breakfast or something, because it's going to be a pretty dark update. Not like the usual upbeat ones that I give most Sundays. Okay, so let's talk about this Gaza operation that took place, Operation Breaking Dawn. So last week, Israel went and arrested one of the leaders of an organization. Their logo is there in the lower left of the screen, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's clearly funded directly by Iran. And you can kind of tell how they feel about the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean as to who should be in charge of that. You always see the maps where they break out the West Bank, but you see the map that they have in the middle of their logo. They want all of it. The logo above that, a little above that to the right, is the logo of Hamas. This is a map that was made up by the Alma Center. You can go to Alma Israel, ALMA Israel, and they do a really good job. The people that run Alma live in northern Israel, near the Lebanon border. So, of course, they're very concerned about Hezbollah and these organizations. And they've done some good research in the past where they've shown that there's while Hamas is largely Sunni, they are funded by Iran. So Iran will overcome the Sunni-Shia differences when it comes to going after Israel. And there's also a big Hamas organization that's growing, sort of separate from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and up to Beirut. So that's all funded by Iran. Iran is using proxies. You hardly ever see an Iranian Revolutionary Guard member get killed or hurt in fighting in Syria or Lebanon or anywhere, because they use proxies. They do this all the time. I mean, everybody uses proxies. Turkey was using Syrian proxies in Libya a couple of years ago. Russia does the same thing. They're even talking Russia's sending non-Russian ethnic minorities from Russia to fight in Ukraine. So Russia's winning in Ukraine, but I don't think it's going as well for them as it could be. And I think their economy is hurting. This Yale study that I referred to, you can go look it up, from the Yale School of Management, went through and looked in pretty good detail the things that are going on with Russia and how they're hurting. So just to recap, the IDF, I think there were about 44 or 47 people from Gaza killed in the recent Operation Breaking Dawn. They reached a truce, within the last day and a half, and that seems to be holding right now. There were over 1,000 rockets fired from Gaza towards Israel. About 25% of them didn't make it. They landed in Gaza. In fact, I played it Sunday. You can go back and look at that video. I had an IDF video that was released that showed the rockets going into Israel, except you see one falling. Well, that hit a refugee camp, and because they're always very densely populated, it killed a bunch of people, including some children. So it's pretty clear that at least 15 of the 44 to 47 that were killed from Gaza were killed by Hamas's own rockets. This happens all the time. Israel also was very successful. The Iron Dome worked very well. They shot down about 97% of the rockets. One house in Israel was hit. There was one person injured. I actually think he was happened to be a Palestinian Arab. Was injured by some shrapnel from an exploding rocket. So it didn't have much of an impact in Israel, but it's expensive. I mean, so if they shot down, they didn't have to shoot down all 1,000 rockets, because when the rockets are shot, they do this immediate calculation and they calculate where it's going to land. And then if it's going to land in a populated area, then they'll shoot it down, because it costs about $50,000 per rocket. Now, Israel's developing something called Iron Beam. Played a bunch of videos of it. It's a laser operated system. They're even looking at putting that on planes. And Israel's way above anybody else in the world in developing this. But I don't think there's a couple problems. It's not operational yet. It's not highly mobile. They'll have to have thousands of these units all over to give the kind of coverage that they might be able to get from Iron Dome. So while it's only like $3.50 to shoot down a rocket with this laser thing, you have to have them close to the launch or close to where they're going to land. And you can't make any mistakes. And they can take out drones as well. And so they're talking about putting it on planes, but it's partially a logistical problem, because as you want to extend the range of the laser, my understanding is you got to increase the power that you supply to it. And that creates a logistical problem. So Israel was very successful. This is the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations was saying that that a UN Security Council meeting, and of course, a lot of them were blaming Israel. They tried to be balanced. Even the United States ambassador, what's her name, Greenfield Thompson or something, this 1619 Project supporter, hates America. Even she admitted, well, the Gazans killed some of their own people, but we mourn the loss of anybody. So even she admitted it, which means that the Gazans really did not do that well. This is a report that was in the I think this is from the this is the UK Times, that Israel had spent months planning this operation, and they were very precise, as they usually are. So now I want to share with you a little bit about an article that I watched or was reading, and it's by Caroline Glick, and now I'm going to have to try to find this thing. Give me 1 second here. She has a good article at JNS Syndicate, and she's talking about the fact that this is just not a great moment for the Israeli caretaker government. She called the title of the article. It's in JNS Jewish News Syndicate today, or yesterday it was published, The Strategic Blindness of Israel's Caretaker Government. So she says, we did things that was successful and everything, but it was a strategic failure. She says this: the first level of strategic failure is the operational one. Breaking Dawn was precipitated by Islamic Jihad's decision to respond to Israel's arrest of its senior operative early last week in Jenin. That's a city where the terrorists live, up in the Samaria, with a threat to carry out a mass casualty attack on Israeli citizens and military personnel from Gaza. So she says we just didn't. And you even look at the headline in Haaretz this morning. That's a left-wing newspaper, they're very closely aligned with the New York Times. They were saying that Hamas really came looking pretty good out of this, because Hamas never fired a shot. They let Palestinian Islamic Jihad take all the heat. But I would just say that, so here's what she says: Lapid and Gantz are poised to accept a deal to transfer some of Israel's sovereign economic waters to Lebanon. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. There are two concepts behind the deal negotiated by the Biden administration. First, most importantly, and like the White House, Lapid and Gantz insist Lebanon is a political entity separate from Hezbollah. This is entirely false. She's absolutely correct on that. If Hezbollah controls the Lebanese government, Hezbollah is the most powerful military organization in Lebanon. It has swallowed the Lebanese armed forces, which operate at Hezbollah's pleasure. And it has also swallowed the government, which will not do anything Hezbollah opposes. The second concept, which flows from the first, is that by enabling Lebanon to develop natural gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel will empower the government against Hezbollah. This, too, is entirely false. Hezbollah controls the negotiations. Lebanon will not profit from the deal at Hezbollah's expense. The deal will transform Hezbollah and Iran into players in the Mediterranean gas industry, opening a whole new sphere of profit as well as potential extortion and blackmail of Israel. And she's exactly right. So we have this this whole thing with the Eastern Mediterranean. So here's the gas fields. I've talked a lot about Line 29. That's the new line that Hezbollah dreamed up when it became apparent that this gas field here, the Karish field, was coming online, and they're supposed to start drilling in September. So once that became apparent, Hezbollah, which had always relied on Line 23, said, no, it's really Line 29, although they've not really formalized that. And Amos Hochstein, U.S. State Department energy specialist, has been running back and forth between Lebanon and Israel trying to negotiate this thing. Some people think that what they're going to do is they're going to give this field, so this is the Israeli line, and you can see that most of this one gas field here begins with S. Can't remember the name of it. It straddles, most of it would be, and everything south of this line would be in Israeli waters. So most of this field is here, but some people think that, well, Israel will just give up this gas field and let Lebanon have it. And Lebanon, they're not going to be drilling out there anytime soon because they're going to have to get somebody to finance it. And whoever's going to finance this is going to be concerned about Hezbollah's influence and that type of thing. So Lebanon is, and understand, this is Hezbollah's view of the, I've lost my mouse. Where did it go? There it is. Hezbollah's view of the what's happening is anything in the gas fields out there, Israel's going to be like the octopus, and they're going to take up all the gas. So Israel's got the Leviathan field there on the left, and then they brought in this big drilling ship to drill in the Karish field. Karish means shark. And so Amos Hochstein's been going back and forth. And rather than go into it, understand that East Mediterranean gas is, I think, a significant thing here in the end times. How significant remains to be seen, but you should know that just north of these fields, where did I keep losing my mouse? Just north of these fields, up towards north of the Hof line, Israel line, up there is Cyprus. And Cyprus is about 60% controlled by Turkey. And this morning, Erdogan was tweeting, oh, look, here are our drilling ships, and we're going to drill in the Eastern Mediterranean wherever we want. If you want to see more about that, a little bit more detail about how Turkey views this, if you want to go to my December 13th, 2020 update, it would be 2020 space 12 space 13. I did a very extensive analysis of a paper that had been prepared by somebody in Turkey Scope or something it was called, and it showed how Turkey and Israel could work together to exploit the gas fields. I'm going to need to exit out of this because I cannot. Excuse me 1 second here. Completely messed up my mouse. There we go. So now I got to go back from my. Okay, from Dave. How about the explosion in Cuba and Crimea in the airfield? Okay, so I'll talk about that. So we'll get back to the East Med gas before, but Dave has a question. So there was an explosion in Cuba of a big oil tanker. I don't know if this was done by somebody. I don't know if it was just accident or negligence at this point in time. There was an explosion at an airfield in Crimea. Russia's been very adamant about if anything happens in Crimea, we are going to we're going to really come down hard on Ukraine. But Russia came out not too long after that attack and said, "Oh, this was just an accident. It wasn't an attack or anything." So I don't know what the truth is. I'm not on the ground there in Crimea. It could be that Russia is trying to save face, that it really was something negligent that happened. It could be that it was an attack and Russia just doesn't have the logistical ground support to fight and take people on in Crimea. That's also a possibility. Their supply chains, they've had some major issues. So I don't really know. I wouldn't make too much of them right now. I think we've got a lot of things to do. So, but this Lebanon thing, like here's this morning's Al Akbar newspaper. That's a Hezbollah newspaper in Lebanon. And you can see there they have the drawing there, and that's Amos Hochstein. There's a picture in the upper right. And they're talking about, we're going to decide this. Well, this is a Hezbollah mouthpiece, and Nasrallah gives these 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour speeches and interviews like 2-3 times a week. He was saying, listen, Hezbollah is going to make the decision. And that's what Caroline says in her article at Jewish News Syndicate. So get that article and read it. It will also help. And she's got her Mideast News Hour. I don't know if she's doing it this week or not, but it's usually released on Tuesday evening. And I would highly recommend that. She has great guests on. 2 weeks ago, she had David Wormser. And I say I'm going a little bit long here already. So I'm going to talk about that on Sunday because we have a couple other things to do about it. Now, this is this morning's Israel Hayom newspaper. And they're talking about the fact that this is, again, discussing the Lebanon situation. It was about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, that Israel Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, issued a report about the next war in the North. And you can go and download the PDF of that and read it. And even though it's about 18 months old, it really laid out a lot of the issues with regard to Israel's northern border, which is probably where the next intense war will start. They can handle Gaza. They just go in. I think Caroline Glick and others, they call it mowing the lawn in Gaza. We have to mow the lawn every now and then in Gaza, but they never really deal with the issue. But now this is an interesting article from today's Israel Hayom, and it says this, that the title of this, the lead article there in the middle of the page, and you can see the drilling ship there in the Mediterranean. If necessary, the message, if necessary, we will also operate in the north of Israel. This is from Reuters, Israel is ready to attack first. A senior security official told Israel Hayom the blow to Islamic Jihad was intended to show the players in the region led by Hezbollah that Israel will not shy away from provocative action to protect the Shark or the Karish Rig. And they said, we may attack first. We may attack Lebanon first. So you need to watch for that, because when that attack happens, you can go to IDSF YouTube channel. I think there's prior briefings by General Amir Avivi. And he's essentially said, when that happens, we're looking at 150,000 rockets minimum they're going to be fired. In the 2006 Lebanon war, over 37 days, we had 4,500 rockets. In Gaza a year ago, we had 4,500 rockets in a 2-week period. Now, this time in 3 days, they had 1,000. But the next time, they're saying we're going to have 4,000 or 5,000 rockets per day, easy, coming into Israel. And it's going to be very disruptive. You can imagine if a third of Israel was in about a 3-day lockdown because of the small rockets and not very directionally capable rockets in Gaza, it's going to be a big problem. So this was also, this guy has been incredibly busy, Mohammed bin Salman. So you go back, he went to Turkey, he went to Egypt, he went to Jordan. He's been shoring up things. Then he had President Biden come. Biden didn't really get anything. And he's looking pretty good right now. So he's definitely in control of things. Iraq, this is Jonathan Spires' article from last Friday in Jerusalem Post, one of the best Middle East analysts out there. And he's talking about the fact that Iraq is having a lot of trouble with its government. So I talked about this Sunday. So I've got 3 more little things I want to talk about. I'll try to keep those short. This is a meeting that took place in Sochi, Russia, on the Black Sea. That's where Putin has a home. It's estimated that home, to rebuild it today, would cost about $1 billion. It's one of the most expensive homes in the world. Of course, he doesn't own it, I guess, because he only makes $50,000 a year or something like that. But he happens to have this huge home in Yan and that type of thing. So Erdogan went to Sochi and met with Putin. And one thing you should take away from this is Putin does not look that bad. For somebody who's near death and has Parkinson's and cancer and that type of thing, the last number of videos that I've seen of him, I mean, he goes and meets for 4 hours in Tehran with the leader of Khamenei and the president of Iran and Erdogan a couple weeks ago. Now he has a couple-hour meeting with Erdogan. He also did an appearance at, I think it's the Valdiv Dialogues. It's a thing that they have each year in Russia. And he sat on stage for 3 hours. I don't even think he got up and went to the bathroom. So that's at least that I could see. So I just don't think that a lot of the stuff that you're hearing about him being near death and all this stuff is somewhat propaganda. But understand that there's this very close relationship developing between Turkey and Iran. Erdogan's running for office next year, so now Turkey's pushing drilling for gas in the Mediterranean. They rolled out the biggest, longest suspension bridge in the world across the Dardanelles a couple of months ago. They built the biggest airport in the world in Istanbul. Erdogan, and it's bankrupting the country, but Erdogan, is he going to get elected? And he's got some things he wants in Syria. And one of the things that they talked about at this meeting was some way to resolve the Syrian conflict that got Erdogan what he wanted. And so what Erdogan wants, he has all of these Sunni refugees, like 3.5 million of them living in Turkey. And it's a big drain. I mean, he gets some help from international agencies, but Turkey's paying for that. Now they're Sunni, and understand that in the Syrian civil war, Russia, working with the Alawite regime in Damascus, and the Iranian Shiites, Alawite and Shiites are kind of related. They bombed the smithereens out of cities. It's the same tactics that have been used in Ukraine. They just go in and obliterate the city so that people move somewhere else. And that's exactly what happened in Syria. And I know I'm going to get a lot of emails saying, "No, you don't understand what happened in Syria." I can watch what happened. A lot of these Sunni areas of Syria have been reduced to rubble, and the people have had to move someplace else. A lot of them went to Jordan, which is Sunni. a lot of them went to Lebanon. So over about 25% of the population of Lebanon right now are Syrian refugees. And then about 3.5 million went to Turkey. So what Turkey wants to do is they want to go in this 30-mile strip along the Turkish border, Turkey-Syria border. They want to essentially take that over, and they want to build these cities. In fact, they have these plans to build like 100,000 residences in this area. And what that will do is they will move in and they'll drive the Kurds out. And Erdogan hates the Kurds. He would like to get rid of the Kurds. And he doesn't really discriminate between the PKK, terrorist Kurds, and anybody else. So this was what was a lot of what was discussed is what are we going to do in Syria? This is the front page of, I think it's today's Financial Times from London. West alarm rises over deepening ties between Russia and Turkey. And it should say between Russia and Turkey and Russia and Iran, because they had that meeting a couple of weeks ago. They came out and they announced Iran and Russia, that they're going to come up with some kind of currency to allow trade between the countries to avoid sanctions. Now it appears that they're bringing Turkey into this. And now Turkey's going out and they're sending their drilling ships out into the Mediterranean. And the only way you're going to stop Erdogan from this is you're going to have to attack his drilling rigs. And you attack his drilling rigs, and then you are fomenting a war. So is it attacking Turkey's drilling rigs that gets Turkey and its new allies or strengthening allies, Iran and Turkey, involved with whoever attacked these drilling rigs, this drilling that's going on? Greece is upset about it. They don't want this. They've threatened Turkey over it, and they may take action. Cyprus may take action, but then you have 60% of the island of Cyprus is Turkish controlled, and Erdogan's back building that up. He's opening up resorts that have been closed for over a decade. So this is a hint. And the other thing you have is, I mentioned this earlier, the rare earth minerals like lithium, and so the supply crunch is coming. And this is from the Financial Times saying that they're saying the lithium supply crunch may last until 2030. And why is everything 2030? It's like 7 years down the road now. I mean, 2030 sustainable development goals, 2030 this, 2030 that. Saudi Arabia has 2030 vision. It just seems like everybody's kind of focused around 2030 as a big deal. And I talked a little bit about that on Sunday, this view that we might have this 6 days of human history, the last 2 days being relative to Israel, the Gentile age of the church, and it comes to close, and then the Lord works with Israel, and there's salvation and all this other thing, and then there's the one-day millennium. That's called Killianism. I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to work out, but I'm just saying is that right now, with all of the stuff tied to 2030, it just seems like that's, depending on when you date the crucifixion and ascension of the Lord, that might have been 2,000 years ago, 2 days ago. That's how somebody into Killianism would look at it. So I put up a big chart in that. If you want a bigger version of that chart, I got that from one of the guys that does work and with Mystery of Israel. It's a group that they love Israel. They're really good Bible scholars. They get together, they talk about the scriptures. I think it's a wonderful group. Reg Kelly heads it up. So if you want that chart, just let me know and I'll try to get that to you. So a couple articles in the tablet. I'll talk more about this in the future, that you see, these are two articles dated March 1st and March 2nd. Russia's next target for intimidation could be Israel. That has that ring of prophetic significance to it. Then it turns around the next day, another article comes out in Tablet magazine, and it says accommodating Iran will be no more successful than accommodating Russia. Putin's horrifying war in Ukraine shows the like results of the West continuing to ignore Iran's nuclear quest. And that was written 5 months ago now. So we can only see that these ties have strengthened even more. Uh, air, uh, uh, Mohammed bin Salman continues to pump up his city of neon. It's this kind of creepy city, mirrored walls, 1,500 feet high, going for close to 100 miles. They're about 200 meters apart. And it's interesting. You read these newspapers. So on the left is Le Figaro, which is a French newspaper, and they're advertising this thing for the line. You see the city there. And then on the right is today's Financial Times, the line. That's what they're calling NEOM, and it runs from this entrance at the Gulf of Aqaba, and there's some islands there that have been the subject of diplomatic negotiations now. And so they're building this giant city projected to hold 9 million people. Even though the city's only a couple hundred meters across, you'll be able to go end to end in 20 minutes. They're talking maglev trains, all sorts of things. Very interesting to get around. They'll be underground. They're environmentally controlled, and like you're talking like the Empire walls, the height of taller than the Empire State Building is, containing something 200 meters wide. But then in this Financial Times thing, they have, which is kind of interesting to me, this is a golf course in the city of Neom. You see at the top part, you see the apartments and homes and people hanging on the wall and golf down below. But this is the vision of Mohammed bin Salman. He is said, I am building my pyramids. So he has very grandiose plans. This is something that also has been pushed. The Zionists were storming Al-Aqsa Mosque. And you can see the people walking on the Temple Mount. The Hamas issued this statement, a number of statements about what was going on during the operation breaking down, but this is one of the things. So we warned the Temple Mount groups against exploiting occasions to implement their malicious schemes aimed at rebuilding the alleged temple and imposing a new status quo in the holy city. And that's sort of what I want to talk about. So this is the inauguration of Raisi last August, and there you see Hanaya. He is the head of Hamas. He really lives in Qatar. He didn't really go to Gaza that much. He's kind of goes between Qatar and Lebanon. And this sort of, and they're funded by Qatar and Iran. So, and he has like one of the best trimmed beards in the history of mankind. So I'm guessing he's at a barber every day, representing the poor people in Gaza. I'll talk more about this in the future. So I want to talk about this a little bit. So let's take about 10 minutes, and I'll try to be finished, because this is, depending on how you interpret Daniel chapter 9, this is kind of a big deal. Now, I talked about this back in June. In early June, I think June 9th, the Wall Street Journal had this article, A Jordanian Future for the West Bank. Now, what's up with that? And there you see King Hussein of Jordan and Yasser Arafat, both who have gone on to their, whatever they went on to when they passed away. King Abdullah II became the king. But the day before the Wall Street Journal article, so this is almost like this is orchestrated. So here are a couple big newspapers publishing this thing about Jordan in the West Bank. And the article on Al Arabiya by a guy named Ali Shahabi he is an advisor, close confidant of Mohammed bin Salman. So it almost like Mohammed bin Salman was able to get these articles published. And it's called The Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine. And he goes through in some detail laying out the vision that Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia has as to how to solve the Palestinian issue. Saudi Arabia has said that without solving the Palestinian issue, reaching some kind of peace there, they won't join the Abraham Accords. It's also interesting as we see this that Hezbollah, people may rise up against Hezbollah. Recent survey came out and said that Lebanon is the most angry and the most depressed place on the planet, mainly because of what Hezbollah has done. And in fact, the symbol of that was the silos, the grain silos that used to be in the port of Beirut 2 years ago. They were effectively destroyed, but the grain stayed in them, and the grain caught on fire, and a couple of them collapsed the other day, like the day before the 2-year anniversary of that explosion, which was the third largest non-nuclear explosion in human history in Beirut. 300,000 people lost their home. 218 were killed. Thousands were injured. A lot of trauma with that. And then Lebanon's just sort of descended into chaos since. So one of the proposals is that they will put in place this peace arrangement, and they really will make a two-state solution. See, right now we have Gaza as sort of a separate state. The West Bank under the PLO or Hamas, whoever will take control of that could be a state. So you have Israel's one state, Gaza's 2, West Bank is 3, and then Jordan is 4. And really the original plan was that it would be called there would be a Jewish state and Transjordan. It would go across transit over the Jordan, and it would be one state. So there would be Transjordan and Israel. And so some people are saying, well, now let's just go back to, we don't have to reinvent anything. So here's what Ali Shahabi said in his article. The problem today, the Palestinian problem can only be solved today if it is redefined. Okay, so we need to change it around. So you're seeing all these articles. You're seeing Al Arabiya, you're seeing the Wall Street Journal. The Palestinian problem can be solved today if it is redefined. The issue in this day and age for people should not be so much ownership of an ancestral land, but more the critical need to have a legal identity. Now, this is a close confidant of Mohammed bin Salman, and he's sort of hinting, like, when my father goes, things are going to change. He can't, because of the tribal nature of their culture, can't really do anything while King Salman is alive. But I would expect you're going to see a relatively rapid change when King Salman goes on. Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed, son of Salman, son of Salman, will change things. And so where Salman is committed to the Arab Peace Initiative from the early 2000s, which was put out by one of his brothers, predecessor king in Saudi Arabia. And so he's doing this out of respect to him. That kind of goes away when King Salman dies. So they're trying to say is we need to redefine it. You Palestinians, you don't need, it's not so much about the land. It's about your identity. And you need to be respected and get busy and be productive and have labor and meet the new Saudi King's 2030 vision. And maybe you can come down and help build NEOM and have a job. Foreign policy, interestingly enough, back in October of 2021, had a person who is a Palestinian who lives in Jordan, wrote this about unite Jordan and Palestine again. So this is something that's been building. Here's what this says here. Ultimately, to solve the most complex political issue in contemporary history would require Israel to give up its illegal occupation and accept the abandonment of West Bank and Gaza. Granted, the idea of Jordanian annexation of these territories would not appeal to Israelis on the radical right, but we can get others to go along with it. And I'm telling you that I'm reading Aruj Shiva in Israel, and there are people, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. He's written a number of, I think maybe I have one of his articles here. This is what the foreign policy article said back in 2021. Jordanian unification would be a vast improvement over the one-sided plan submitted in 2020 by then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump. Even before all of this stuff started coming out, the EU got involved, and they talked about they were meeting between the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the EU, and there's no doubt that the EU would be on in this. This is their press statement related to their early June meeting. They reiterated that the only path to a just, lasting, and comprehensive resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the two-state solution that ends occupation and leads to the establishment of an independent, contiguous, sovereign, and viable Palestinian state on the lines of 4 June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. They condemned the expansion of the settlements. Now, MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, you should follow that. It's a great organization. Support them if you can. There were a lot of people who responded to Al-Shahabi's article saying, we don't want this, okay? They were angry about it. They didn't want this, but the Saudis, there's been some grousing about it, but the Saudis have been kind of quiet about it. The other interesting thing is nobody's ever really talking about it. So look, I've said this before, there's this belief in the futurist premillennial community that this last period of human history starts with the confirmation of a covenant, the confirmation of a peace agreement that it is. So I'm not sure that's exactly what that means, but let's just say that it is. Let's just pretend that I'm wrong and everybody else is right, which is not, you maybe not have to pretend to do that, not pretend very hard. But everybody always says, well, that's how the Antichrist will be identified. But what I'm telling you is, here you have this major thing that's been floating around for over 2 months now that not that many people have talked about. I know I've talked about it, and a couple other people. I think Bill Caney did a interview with Sam Rohr on American Family Radio, but nobody's really talking about it. And at the same time, you have this future Saudi king building this giant city that happens to be area-wise, even though it's only a couple hundred meters wide, it's 100 miles long. It's effectively the size of Israel, this city. And it will be built for 9 million people. And that's about how many live in Israel now. It's just, I'm just saying and this thing is kind of flying under the radar. So I'm always saying I don't think that's how the Antichrist is identified. He's identified when he does the abomination of desolation. That's sort of the definitive thing. I think a lot of people will understand that before then, but I don't know that if it is a confirmation of a peace agreement and a true two-state solution, the Hashemite kingdom of Palestine/Jordan and Israel, that's 2 states. It's not Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, and Israel. That's 4 states. So I'm just saying is that it's something to consider, but it's kind of flying under the radar, and it's not a big public thing. At least it hasn't been heretofore. And at the same time, this is Mohammed bin Salman. He goes to Turkey, welcomed warmly by Erdogan, and they've really been on the outs, and it's over. All that being out. By the way, I heard an interview this morning with Mohammed bin Salman, and he speaks very good English. There was no translator, and there wasn't even what I would call a real heavy accent. So, and a lot of the Saudis speak English. But this is kind of interesting because when bin Salman left Turkey, Erdogan went to the airport with him. This is very unusual for the leader of a country to accompany the leader of another country to the airport and wave goodbye. This really didn't appear in a lot of the press, but it's been leaked to the press. So Mohammed bin Salman wanted this to get out. And you catch the imagery there. I don't dismiss the Saudi involvement in all of this. Don't dismiss the Abraham Accords and all of this. Don't dismiss this Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan plan. I think it's nuts. I'll explain why very quickly in just a moment. But I mean, here's a guy. This is David Singer. at Israel National News, Aretz Shiva, writing about the fact that this will be a great thing. He's criticizing the guy, the person who gets in front of the Security Council and talks about how bad Israel is. His name is Tor Winnisland now. He replaced the other guy who just retired. And they had the Security Council meeting yesterday, and he was saying, hey, this was really bad what happened in Gaza and that thing. But he never mentioned this whole Saudi-backed peace plan that's been floating around out there now for 2 months. It's interesting. This is what David Singer says in his article. It's amazing to think that one of the highest ranking United Nations officials dealing with the Palestinian question, Tor Winnisland, could address the Security Council on the current situation without telling that august body of a significant new proposal that could finally end this 100-year-old unresolved Jewish-Arab conflict. That proposal, emanating from Saudi Arabia, calls for the merger of Jordan, Gaza, and part of the West Bank into one single territorial entity to be called the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine. Its author, the author in Al Jazeera, Ali Shababi, is a confident and staunch defender of Saudi's next king. Go follow him on Twitter, Ali Shahabi, Shihabi, and follow him. He's got a lot of interesting articles and references that he does. It's a treasure trove. If you want to understand where the Saudis are coming from, you'll learn a lot by following him. Its author is a confident and staunch defender of Saudi Arabia's next king. Shahabi is a member of the advisory board of, what is he a member of the advisory board of? NEOM. Ben Salman's proposed $500 billion, actually $1 trillion mega city of the future to be built on the ground in northern Saudi Arabia, close to Israel. I'm just telling you what is happening. So here, so back in about 1970, and really this, I think, came out after the 67 war, and this was supported, I think, by King Hussein of Jordan. And this is before they had a really bad falling out between the Kingdom of Jordan and the Palestinian Liberation Organization headed by Yasser Arafat. They came out this Elan plan. This is under Yitzhak Rabin. And you see the proposal there. There would be I'm going to mess up my mouse again. So there would be a road. So this would be the sort of the heart. These areas here, orange areas, those would be Israel. There would be a road link between Gaza and the West Bank. And there would be a road link between the West Bank and Jordan. So all of this would be one entity. Now, this says they're going to give half of Gaza to Israel, and that was 1970, and that's not happening because that's all been given over to Gaza. That was pushed by Bush 43 and acceded to by Ariel Sharon back in 2005. Immediately after which we had this massive thing called Katrina, which, by the way, affected about the same percentage of, so that if you take this area of Gaza relative to the whole of Israel, it was about the same area, the percentage of our country that was affected by Katrina. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. It's not true or anything like that. This would be terrible if I'm talking here. I can't hear myself on YouTube, so I'm sort of assuming that I'm coming through and I'm not getting myself, I'm not losing sound and everything. So if there are any more questions, you could have them. So I know I'm gone kind of long, which is usual for me. So, but look at the similarity between the Elan plan and the Jared Kushner, Donald Trump vision for peace in 2020. Do you see the similarities? Here's a little bit larger map. So here's the Elan plan. This is the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan plan that they're talking about right now. It's being revived by Mohammed bin Salman. And he went to Jordan. He went to Jordan in June? Did they talk about this? Because this was released right around the time by Al Arabiya newspaper, and Ali Shihabi article came out right around the time that bin Salman was going to Egypt and Jordan and Turkey. And were they talking about this? Again, these things happen in back rooms a lot of times, and there's leaks in newspapers. And it just so happened Al Arabiya and Wall Street Journal within 24 hours are talking about this. So here is the Elan plan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine plan, if you want to call it that. And look at that. Here's what it was in 1970. And 50 years later, here's the Trump plan. Look at the similarities. They are very similar. The only difference was Jordan was kept as a separate entity under the Kushner plan. And now Kushner's over there working with Mohammed bin Salman and getting he has the Arab Accords Peace Institute, and he's involved in that. He's been to Saudi Arabia recently. He's been to Israel recently. He's gotten billions of dollars in funding for his hedge fund, investment fund. But look at the similarities between the two. So if you hold, this is what can happen. If you hold to the confirmation of the government being a peace agreement, that is its existing plan that's confirmed by the person who will be the Antichrist, this ought to make you wake up and say, that could happen. That really could happen. So here I've overlaid it a little bit. Here's the 50-year-old plan. Here's the current plan. You see that? Other than adding Jordan in, they're the same thing. Now it's a tunnel instead of a road. But you see, you've got the connectors there for between what it would be the southern West Bank part of this Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine and the northern. And the settlements, excuse me, some of the settlements are retained. Now, the problem with this is you need to understand the geography of Israel a little bit. Israel's very hilly, and the lowest place on earth is the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is 212 meters below sea level. It's like 700 feet below sea level. And you can see it goes up very rapidly to Mount Hermon. And so when you're driving up through the Jordan Valley, this is along the Dead Sea. It's like this giant wall. Here's a cross section of the land of Israel going from east where Ammon is. You see that at 3,530 feet. See Jericho minus 825 feet, Dead Sea 1,300 feet below sea level. And then you see Jerusalem 2,500 feet. So there's this like wall. Here's what it looks like from south to north. So from this, by the way, between those two red lines at the bottom is about 45 miles or 50 miles. And then on this one, from the Dead Sea to Mount Hermon is about 140 miles. So they give you some idea. Now so you see here in the center, you see Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. In the middle of that, there's a valley, and this is what a 3D rendering of that looks like. This is the city of Nablus. And they just had they got a terrorist there today and killed him yesterday or today. And so that's Nablus. This very dense looking area right here, that's called Balata. That is a refugee camp that has been there since 1948. I mean, it's about one of the only places, maybe the only place on earth that you can inherit, refugee status is passed down from generation to generation. And then on the left here, this is Mount Gerizim. That's where the Samaritans live. And they still live there today. They have a temple area. They have an area where they do the sacrifice. And they probably practice the Torah more strictly than any Orthodox Jewish sect. They have a Torah. They only do the first 5 books. A Torah, the script is very similar to the Hebrew script in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, and they're really, there's about 70 families, I think, left, about 800 of them, maybe it's 50 families. And they bring a lamb and Passover and they sacrifice it there in the center of the village up there. You can see the remnants of the old temple there. There's, and this is Mount Ebal. This is where Joshua built an altar. And this is that area where they found that script that mentioned Yahweh, the earliest reference outside the Bible that Scott Sterling and some of the other guys found recently, or were able to confirm recently, a little lead tablet that had that name in the tablet of curses. It was a tablet of curses. So right in the middle of this area here in this, I think I drew the wrong place. No, that's Shechem. So this is Balata. That's the refugee camp. This is Shechem. When you stand at Shechem at the Tell, this is where Joshua's standing stone is. You can go and see it. And so when they did the blessing and curses, they did that. Half of Israel was on this mountain, half on this mountain. They shouted back and forth. This is about 1 mile between these two places. So you imagine how the locals felt about that. And so just about a quarter mile over here is a Greek Orthodox church that's built above Jacob's well. And it's a very deep well. And the Samaritan woman that met Jesus there, your people, my people worship in this mountain. There's the temple up there, would have been existent at the time of Jesus. And your people worship in Jerusalem, which is down here to the south. And she came from, there's a mosque here in this village, which is probably built over the place where she was from, because they build over stuff to market. So anyway, look, this is all that's happening. One more thing, and then I'm done. I've gotten way too long. Goodness gracious. This is from today's Tehran Times to show the relationship between Iran and Russia. So this is a Soviet Soyuz rocket from the Soyuz space, this Russian space area in Kazakhstan. It's been there since the old Soviet days. And Iran wanted to shoot a satellite. And so here is this shooting this rocket into space. And you'll see here I think you'll be able to see it here in just a second. You see the Iranian flag on the side of this. There you go. There's the Iranian flag launching a sophisticated satellite into orbit. So you see, this is more of this relationship between Iran and Russia. So we got Iran and Turkey, we got Iran and Russia, we got Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and they're all kind of working together again. So it all seems to fit. So look, I'm going to take a quick look at my, turn off my share screen here, and we will, I'm not sure how I do this now. I had a little icon down here, and maybe I haven't been sharing my screen. I don't know, all along. But anyway, so I'll cover some of this again on Sunday. So I appreciate your time. If you have a couple quick questions, I will try to, I'll try to look at those real quickly. I don't see any more questions. So I'll check the chat real quick, and then I'll let you guys go. So thanks for listening. We'll be back Sunday, and I'm trying to find my YouTube. Okay, so I'm looking here real quickly. Yeah, Veronica, I would affirm your thing that it is unbelievable. I must have either, it was very interesting and people were listening and didn't have any questions, or people were, I put them to sleep. So anyway, Well, I don't want to read back to this and you watch me read. That's not very interesting. So talk to you Sunday. I may have something else to put up. Very interesting times. We have the country's falling apart and Israel's in turmoil. There's rumors of war everywhere. You have these alliances that are forming. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, here comes the Saudi guy with a peace plan. And it's a revival of one that's 50 years old. And it's sort of a revival of the one that Trump proposed. But everybody will say, oh, it wasn't Trump. It was it was the Saudi guy who came up with this. Very interesting times to be alive. So anyway, thanks for listening. And I'm going to shut this off and we'll talk later. God bless.